Margaret Doyle, 73, stood in front of the towering black gate, her hands trembling as she adjusted the hem of her coat. The California sun had long since faded behind the hills, but she could still see the golden lights of the mansion flickering through the trees. Her breath hitched. It had taken her 3 buses, 1 plane, and a borrowed suitcase to get here. She didn't tell anyone back home she was coming. Not the church ladies, not the corner pharmacist who always asked about her son, and certainly not Nathan. She hadn't come for money or pity. Just a chance to see him again, to see his eyes light up like they used to when he ran down the hallway with crayon drawings and dreams too big for their old Detroit apartment. She pressed the buzzer on the gate. The intercom crackled. "Who is this?" She swallowed hard. "It's your mother, Nathan." There was silence. For a long time. Long enough for her heart to twist into something unrecognizable. The gate clicked. She pushed it open with aching arms and walked up the gravel path, every step a prayer, every breath a memory. The front door opened before she could knock again, and there he was, Nathan, taller than she remembered, dressed in a navy suit, no tie, barefoot. His hair slicked back, the kind of style she'd never seen on him in any of the photos online. He looked like a stranger in her son's skin. "Mama," he said, but there was no joy in his voice, just confusion, just hesitation. "I was in the area," she lied softly. "I thought maybe we could talk." His eyes darted behind him, into the house. She could hear laughter, voices, music, a party, people clinking glasses. He stepped outside, closed the door halfway behind him. "You can't be here. Not like this," he whispered, his jaw tight. "I have guests. It's not a good time." Margaret felt her chest tighten, like a vice slowly twisting. "I only came to see you, just for a moment." "I wish you would have called," he said. "You showing up like this, it's just not how things are done anymore." She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came. Only air. Only pain. Nathan glanced back once more, then leaned in and kissed her cheek so lightly she barely felt it. "I'll call you soon. I promise." And just like that, the door closed. She stood there for a moment longer, her hands at her sides, the sound of laughter still spilling through the windows. Then, slowly, she turned and began the long walk back down the hill. The ache in her knees was nothing compared to the weight in her chest. The night was warm, but inside her coat pocket, her fingers curled tightly around the photo of Nathan at 10 years old, smiling, gap-toothed, his arm around her shoulders. She had carried it all this way, and now it was the only thing holding her together. The road back down the hill was longer than Margaret remembered, or maybe it was just her legs, stiff from age and swollen from the hours spent traveling. Her shoes, soft-soled and worn thin, made little sound against the asphalt, but inside her head, the silence roared. Not the peaceful kind she knew from mornings in her kitchen, but the hollow kind, the kind that followed slammed doors and words you couldn't take back. She had imagined it differently. Not grand, no. Margaret never dreamed of sweeping reunions or hugs that lasted minutes. She just thought, maybe a seat at his table, a plate, a smile, maybe a cup of tea. She would have taken even 10 minutes on the back porch. But instead, Nathan's voice, so cold, so clipped, kept playing in her mind. "You can't be here. Not like this." It wasn't anger. That would have hurt less. It was embarrassment. She paused at the bottom of the hill where the streetlights flickered. There was no one else around, just the whir of a sprinkler and the gentle hum of cicadas in the distance. She reached into her coat pocket again, pulling out the photo. Nathan had drawn a red heart on the back in crayon when he was 10. To Mama, love you forever. The ink had faded, but the memory hadn't. She sat down on the bench by the bus stop, though no bus was due for hours. Her legs couldn't carry her any farther right now. The mansion loomed behind her like a dream she was never meant to enter. It wasn't the marble floors or chandelier light she'd remember. It was the look on her son's face when he realized she didn't belong there. Margaret looked up at the night sky. No stars, just clouds, thick and low, as if the heavens themselves had decided to look away. Her hands rested in her lap, quiet now. No trembling, just stillness. All she had wanted was a moment to see him, to say, I love you, to remind him where he came from, not out of guilt, not for thanks, just because that's what mothers do, even when it's not returned. As the wind picked up, she pulled her coat tighter around her. Across the street, the lights in the mansion flickered again, and the faint sound of laughter floated out like smoke. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the sound of Nathan's laugh before it became something polished and rehearsed. It used to bubble up, wild and boyish, when he played in the living room, when she was still his whole world. Now she was a knock at a door he wished hadn't come, and the walk down the hill, through that silence, felt longer than the years that had passed between them. The next morning, Margaret sat at her kitchen table, staring at the chipped rim of her old teacup. A beam of weak light filtered through the window, catching dust motes in its path. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old toast. Everything around her was still, the kettle cooling, the radio off, the photo of Nathan on the fridge crooked from where she'd bumped it days ago and never bothered to fix. How did we get here? She whispered, her voice catching in the air. Her hands moved slowly, spreading a thin layer of jam over half a piece of toast. She wasn't hungry, but routine had always been her anchor. When Nathan was little, mornings were rushed and joyful. She'd pack his lunch, find his missing sock, and send him out the door with a kiss on the forehead and a whispered prayer. They didn't have much, never did, but love covered what pennies couldn't. She remembered working the night shift at the hospital, mopping floors, scrubbing toilets. She'd come home just before sunrise, her feet aching, her fingers cracked from bleach, but still managed to get breakfast on the table before Nathan's alarm went off. He never saw the exhaustion. She never let him. There was a time when he would lay his head in her lap and say, I'm going to buy you a big house one day, Mama, with a porch swing, and you'll never have to mop floors again. She believed him, not because she needed the house, but because in those words was a son who noticed, a boy who saw how hard his mother worked and promised she'd be repaid in something more than silence. Now the silence filled every corner. She stood and walked slowly to the living room, where a stack of old letters sat beside the dusty phone. Some were addressed to Nathan. Most had never been mailed. Birthday cards, clippings from the local paper, a recipe she thought he might like. She had started writing them after his first year in college, when his calls became less frequent and his voice more distant. She'd always told herself he was just busy, that his world had grown too big for the tiny apartment he grew up in. But last night, standing on his doorstep, uninvited and unseen, she realized it wasn't about time or busyness. It was about something deeper, something she couldn't name. She returned to her chair and sat down slowly, cupping her tea with both hands. How did we get here? The answer, she feared, was buried in the quiet years. The years when she loved loudly and he began to whisper, when she held on and he learned to let go. And now, all she had left was the echo. Nathan had always been different. Not difficult, not wild, just different. While other boys in the neighborhood played tag in the alley or chased each other with sticks, Nathan sat on the steps of their apartment building with a library book in his lap, his little brow furrowed, like he was reading secrets meant for grown men. Margaret used to tease him gently. "You'll wear your eyes out reading like that." And he'd smile without looking up and say, "Then I'll just listen harder." He was 5 when he asked her what Harvard was. She had to look it up in an old encyclopedia from the church book sale. From that day on, he started saying things like, "One day I'll go there, Mama." And she started laughing a little less and listening a little more. By the time he was 10, Margaret knew he wasn't going to stay in their neighborhood. He memorized maps for fun, wrote essays that made his teachers cry, and spent hours fixing broken radios he found in dumpsters. Once, when he was 12, he came home with a beat-up second-hand laptop someone had tossed in the alley. He spent 2 weeks figuring out how to fix it using borrowed library books and tutorials from a school computer lab. When he finally got it working, he held it up like Moses with the tablets. "See, Mama? I told you. Nothing's ever really broken if you understand it." Margaret saved every report card. Straight A's, all the way through. Every certificate was tacked to the wall like a shrine to a better future. People in the building started calling him the genius, and Margaret would just smile shyly, hiding her pride behind modesty. She never let herself believe too much. Life had taught her that dreams had a habit of slipping away, but still, in her quietest moments, she let herself imagine. She stopped buying anything for herself after his sophomore year. Every spare dollar went into a coffee tin hidden in the pantry. She called it the Harvard Fund, even though she knew it would never be enough. When Nathan's application fees came due, she sold the gold band she'd kept after Thomas died. Her wedding ring, the only piece of jewelry she had left. The pawnshop clerk gave her a hard look, but she didn't flinch. It was spring when the envelope arrived, thick, white, and elegant. Nathan opened it with shaking hands. Margaret held her breath. Then he whooped, loud and raw, and grabbed her in a hug that lifted her off the floor. "I did it, Mama. I really did it." And in that moment, standing in their tiny kitchen with the linoleum peeling and the kettle whistling, she truly believed they had made it. Not just him, they. Every floor she scrubbed, every shift she endured, every sacrifice. They were all worth it. If only she'd known what that moment would cost her later. The morning Nathan left for Harvard, the sky was overcast, a soft grey, the kind that made everything look a little quieter, a little lonelier. Margaret woke up before dawn, not because she had to, his bus wouldn't leave until 10, but because she couldn't sleep. She spent the early hours ironing his shirt twice, repacking his suitcase even though she'd done it the night before, and making his favourite breakfast. Eggs scrambled with cheese, toast with strawberry jam, 2 slices of bacon curled just the way he liked them. Nathan barely touched the food. His nerves were visible in the way he kept tapping his fingers against the side of his mug, eyes darting to the clock on the wall every few minutes. Margaret watched him from across the table, memorizing the lines of his face, how he'd started shaving just a few months ago, the way his voice had deepened, how his shoulders had broadened. He still looked like her boy, but there was something new now, a distance that hadn't been there before. "You nervous?" she asked gently, trying to sound cheerful. He smiled faintly. "A little. But it's good, right? I mean, it's what we worked for." We. He still said we. and that soothed something inside her. She nodded, pouring more coffee into his cup, even though he hadn't finished the first. At the bus station, she stood close to him as he checked in his bag. Other families huddled around their children, some mothers sobbing openly, others snapping photos. Margaret didn't cry. Not yet. She didn't want to embarrass him. When the bus pulled up, Nathan turned to her and adjusted the strap of his backpack. "Thanks, Mama," he said. "For everything." She touched his cheek with her rough fingers. "Just don't forget where you came from." "Never," he promised, flashing her a grin that reminded her of the boy who used to bring her wildflowers in a chipped mug. Then he boarded the bus. She stood there long after it pulled away, watching the exhaust fade into the air. Around her, the station emptied. The world went on. But something inside her had shifted, like a door had closed, softly, but completely. Walking home, the silence clung to her like a second skin. The apartment felt bigger, somehow colder. She found his old sneakers by the door and sat with them in her lap for a long time. She didn't weep. Instead, she whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for him. She prayed he would thrive, that he would find kindness in the world, that he would remember the taste of her cooking, the feel of her arms, the sound of her voice calling him in for supper. And most of all, she prayed he would come back. At first, the silence didn't worry her. Margaret told herself it was normal. Nathan was adjusting to a new world, new friends, new classes, a campus so large it could have swallowed their whole neighborhood. She waited by the phone in the evenings, a book on her lap that she never truly read, just in case he called. When he finally did, 2 weeks after he left, she practically leapt from her chair. "Hey, Mama," he said. His voice was low, distracted. She could hear laughter in the background. "I've been waiting to hear your voice," she said, forcing a brightness she didn't feel. "Are you eating well? Sleeping enough?" Yeah, everything's good, just really busy." That was always the word. Busy. It became the explanation for everything. The calls grew shorter, less frequent. Sometimes she'd call, and it would go straight to voicemail. She left messages, cheerful at first, then more tentative. "Just wanted to hear how you're doing. Let me know if you need anything. I made that meatloaf you liked. Funny how quiet the house is without you." She sent care packages, homemade cookies, socks she'd knitted, a photo of the two of them from his high school graduation. He never mentioned receiving them. Thanksgiving came and went. He said he couldn't afford the flight. "I'll try for Christmas, Mama, promise." But Christmas Eve came with only a call, 5 minutes long, his voice clipped and formal. That night, Margaret placed the extra plate on the table anyway. She poured him a glass of cider and sat across from the empty seat, hands folded, trying not to cry. She told herself she was being too sensitive, that boys grow up, that college changes people. But deep down, something ached. She wasn't asking for much. Just a call, a visit, a crumb of the affection she once held like a treasure. One afternoon in early spring, she went to the mailbox and found a postcard. Harvard's campus, bathed in snow. No note, just his name scribbled in rushed pen. Not love, Nathan. Just Nathan. She held it for a long time before pinning it to the fridge. Neighbors still asked about him. "How's your boy doing out east?" they'd say with wide smiles. "I saw him in that article. What a genius." And she'd smile back, nodding. "He's doing just fine," she'd reply, voice steady. But later, alone in the quiet of her kitchen, Margaret would sit at the table, the phone beside her like a stubborn ghost. She'd place her hands on the Bible, close her eyes, and whisper, "Please let him remember. Let him remember who held his hand when he was sick, who clapped the loudest at his spelling bees, who gave up everything so he could leave." But God didn't answer, and neither did Nathan. Margaret first learned about the mansion from a magazine left behind at the church thrift table. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just passing time before her bus. The glossy cover featured a list of top 30 under 30 in tech. She turned the pages slowly, more curious than invested, until a familiar name leapt off the page. Nathan Doyle, 29, CEO of Argon Systems. A photo accompanied the blurb, her son in a tailored charcoal suit, standing confidently in front of a sleek glass building. He looked older, sharper, smiling, but not the smile she remembered. This one was practiced, for cameras and boardrooms. The article mentioned his newly acquired property in Hillsborough. A mansion, it said, 8 bedrooms, a wine cellar, an infinity pool. Margaret stared at the photo, her hands trembling slightly. She tore the page out quietly and folded it into her purse. That night, she sat at her kitchen table and smoothed the paper flat. She read every word again. Mansion, CEO, success. She felt pride, yes, but beneath it, a hollowness, the kind of ache that didn't come from envy or resentment, but from being forgotten. She clipped the article and added it to a growing folder she kept in the bottom drawer of her desk. Newspaper mentions, screenshots of interviews, a grainy picture from a tech conference. It was her way of keeping track of him, since he no longer offered the details himself. Nathan hadn't visited in almost 5 years, hadn't invited her to his apartment, let alone a mansion. He hadn't even mentioned moving. She told herself there were reasons, that maybe he didn't want to burden her with the extravagance, that he worried she wouldn't fit in. But as the days passed, that reasoning began to unravel. She wrote him a letter the next morning, a simple one. Saw the article. So proud of you. Hope you're well. She debated including a photo, one of her in the garden, smiling with a sun hat to remind him of the woman who raised him. But in the end, she kept it short and plain. She never received a reply. A month later, she saw a video on the internet. Nathan walking through the halls of his company headquarters, talking about innovation and discipline and sacrifice. "My success," he said, "is the result of years of hard work and focus." Not a single mention of the woman who once worked double shifts to buy his textbooks, who packed his lunches while her feet bled from standing too long. She shut the laptop slowly, letting the silence return. Then she stood, walked to the fridge, and pinned the magazine clipping beside the others. It didn't make her bitter, but it made her wonder. How far must a son climb before he forgets who first gave him the ladder? The drawer beside Margaret's bed groaned when she opened it, swollen with paper and years. Inside, bundled in soft string and aged at the corners, were the letters, dozens of them, maybe more. Some were neatly folded, others smudged from tears or tea, and a few still carried the faint scent of lavender from her dresser sachets. She ran her hand over the top envelope. Christmas, 2014. A card with a hand-painted snow scene and a handwritten note. Made the stuffing from scratch this year. Tastes just like you used to love. I hope you're keeping warm. Call me when you can. Love, Mama. He never called. Another letter beneath it, marked April 2016, contained an article she clipped about a book launch he was part of. She'd scribbled in the margins. Your photo made the front page of the business section. I showed it to Pastor Jim and the choir ladies. They're all so proud of you. We all are. She never heard back. There were birthday cards filled with prayers, recipes she thought he might like, updates about her garden, her arthritis, the death of their old neighbour, Mrs. Fields. All folded, all sealed, many never mailed. She used to sit at the kitchen table, pen in hand, carefully choosing her words, practicing them aloud like she was preparing for a recital. Then she'd place the letter in the drawer instead of the mailbox. Why? She could never fully say. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe she simply got tired of waiting for a reply that never came. One evening, after her neighbour helped her set up email at the library, she sent him a message. Just a few lines. "Hello, sweetheart. Thinking of you? Hope all is well." The screen confirmed it had been sent. It never showed a reply. Eventually, she stopped logging in. Margaret never confronted him, never asked why the silence had become so thick. She told herself he was busy, important, surrounded by people who expected him to be someone else. A version of Nathan she didn't recognize. A man too polished for the woman with rough hands and a plain voice who raised him in a one-bedroom flat. Still, she wrote, because it was the only way she could keep him close, even if only in memory. Because the words she never said out loud had to go somewhere. Because even when a child turns away, a mother's instinct is to reach. That night, she took out the most recent letter, unfinished, resting on her desk since the morning she'd returned from the mansion. She looked at the last sentence she had written. "I came to see you today." She stared at the page for a long time. Then, slowly, she folded it closed and tucked it beneath the others, sealing it not with tape or glue, but with silence. Margaret hadn't planned on going. Not really. The thought had lingered in the back of her mind for months, maybe years, like a shadow that stretched just out of reach. But shadows don't knock on doors, and Margaret Doyle, for all her quiet strength, had never been one to chase what didn't want her. But something shifted that spring. Maybe it was the hollowness that settled deeper with every passing holiday. Maybe it was the sound of her neighbour's grandson laughing in the courtyard, a sound so pure it split her heart open. Or maybe it was the ache in her knees that made her realize time was no longer a thing she could afford to waste. The moment came on a Tuesday, as she was folding the laundry. A simple, ordinary day. The radio hummed a hymn in the background, and the scent of lemon soap lingered on her hands. She reached for one of Nathan's old shirts, the one she'd kept since he was 15, soft and faded, with a tiny tear near the cuff, and held it for a moment longer than she meant to. She pressed it to her chest and felt the years roll over her like a tide. He hadn't come back, not once. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed, the shirt still in her hands. "What am I waiting for?" she whispered. That night, at Bible study, she mentioned him casually, how he was living in California now, how he was doing well, though she hadn't seen him in some time. One of the ladies, Miss Clara, reached into her purse and pressed something into Margaret's palm. A plane ticket voucher. "My niece works for the airline," Clara said. "It expires in 2 weeks. I'm not going anywhere." "You should." Margaret didn't know what to say. She stared at the paper in her hand, stunned. A door had been cracked open, not by her son, but by a friend who barely knew him. That night, she pulled out the small floral suitcase from her closet, the one Nathan had bought her years ago when he still remembered birthdays. She packed slow and careful. A Sunday dress, her best shoes, a wool shawl in case the air was sharp. And tucked between the folds, she placed the photograph of Nathan at age 10, smiling in front of his science fair project. the one where he'd won first place and made her promise to keep it forever. She didn't expect a parade. She didn't even expect a hug. She just wanted to see him, to look into his eyes and know if the boy she raised was still somewhere behind them. The flight was booked for Saturday. She didn't tell anyone else. She told herself it wasn't a big thing, just a visit, just a mother reminding her son that she was still here. But deep in her bones, she knew it was more than that. It was her last try. The taxi pulled up to the estate just before sunset, the sky streaked in amber and soft rose. Margaret pressed her hands against her knees as the car came to a stop, steadying herself before stepping out. The driver offered to wait, but she shook her head with a gentle smile. "No, thank you. I'll be all right." She paid him, tucked the receipt into her purse without looking, and stood alone at the foot of the long, winding driveway. Before her, the house rose like something from a magazine, elegant, cold, a world apart from anything she'd ever called home. The hedges were sculpted, the windows glinted like polished mirrors, and the driveway curved like a question mark leading to a life she no longer understood. But it wasn't the house that stopped her. It was the gate. Tall, black, iron-wrought, it stood like a sentinel. Closed, unwelcoming. There was a speaker embedded in the stone pillar beside it, blinking softly. She hesitated before reaching out. Her finger hovered, trembling ever so slightly, then pressed the call button. A short beep, then a voice. "This is Hillsborough Residence. State your name." She opened her mouth, then cleared her throat. "Margaret Doyle," she said quietly. "I'm Nathan's mother." Silence. A long one. She thought maybe they hadn't heard her, or maybe it was a recording, or maybe... Then came another voice, a voice she hadn't heard in person in nearly 8 years. "Mom." Her heart clenched. "Yes, Nathan, it's me." Another pause. She could hear faint music in the background, the clinking of glasses, voices laughing. He had company. What are you doing here?" His tone wasn't angry, just stunned, and not the good kind. "I was nearby," she lied again. "I thought I'd stop by, just to see you. I won't stay long." The silence that followed was heavier than any suitcase she had ever carried. The gate clicked. She pushed it open slowly, careful not to lose her balance. The gravel crunched under her feet with every timid step. The house loomed larger the closer she got. And then the door opened. Nathan stood there, backlit by warm chandelier light, a drink in his hand, a shadow of confusion on his face. He stepped outside and closed the door gently behind him. The music inside muffled instantly. He didn't hug her. "Mama," he said softly. "You should have called first." She opened her mouth. "I didn't think I needed an invitation." Nathan looked past her, as if checking to see if someone had come with her. Then he looked at the ground. I have people over. It's a bad time." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I'll call you next week, okay? We'll set something up. A lunch." She nodded, numb. "All right." Then he kissed her cheek, just a brush of air and nothing more, and slipped back inside. The door shut, the lock clicked, and Margaret turned around, the wind catching her shawl, her heart heavier than her bag. She hadn't expected a grand reunion. Margaret knew better than to chase fantasy, but even so, she hadn't expected that. Not the way he stepped outside and closed the door behind him like she was a solicitor. Not the way he looked over her shoulder as if hoping someone else would appear instead. What stung wasn't that he was cold. It was that he was careful. He had leaned in, lips grazing her cheek without warmth, and pulled back too quickly, as if affection were a risk he couldn't afford. He glanced at his watch. She caught the gesture, small and sharp, and tucked it into her chest like a wound. "I wish you had called, Mama," he said again, quieter this time. "You can't just show up." She stood there, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just wanted to see you. That's all." He shifted, folding his arms. "You came all the way from Detroit?" "I had a voucher," she said. "A friend gave it to me. I thought maybe we could sit for a minute. Just talk." Nathan's mouth opened, but the words were slow to follow. "It's just, people are inside. Important people, investors. It's a networking thing." He said it like she would understand. Like networking explained everything. Margaret looked past him, into the golden light behind the door. There were wine glasses on silver trays, faint music, laughter echoing through rooms she'd never see. She nodded. "I see." He softened, just a little. "It's not that I don't want to see you. I do. It's just not the right time. I'll call you this week, all right? We'll set something up properly." Properly. She bit down the words, rising in her throat. When did love become something you needed to schedule? "I'll be around," she said, though her voice faltered on the last word. "Okay," he said, already reaching for the doorknob. And then came the moment she would replay for years. His hand on the door, his face turned away, he said, almost too quietly, "I've built a different life now. I can't always go back." That was the sentence. The one that echoed louder than the slam of the door. The one that settled into her bones and stayed. She stood there until the light from the windows dimmed and the sound of celebration became background noise, distant and untouchable. Then she turned, walked slowly back down the long drive and out into the night, her hands buried deep in her coat pockets. And though her feet touched the ground, something inside her never stopped falling. The rain began as a drizzle, soft, almost apologetic, like the sky itself wasn't sure whether to cry. Margaret pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out onto the empty sidewalk, the mansion vanishing behind her with every step. She didn't look back. Not once. If she did, she was afraid her legs might stop working altogether. She walked without direction, without a plan, just forward. The neighborhood was too quiet, too manicured. The kind of place where even sorrow didn't feel welcome. Expensive cars sat idle in driveways like showpieces, and warm light spilled from tall windows where families gathered around long tables. But none of those doors would open for her. Her shoes, cheap and worn thin at the soles, soaked through almost immediately. Every step squelched. Still, she walked. No buses ran this late. She'd known that when she came. She had planned to call a cab, maybe ask to use Nathan's phone. But there hadn't been a moment to ask. There hadn't even been a chair to sit in. She passed a bakery with its lights off, the scent of sweet bread clinging to the cold air. A small dog barked behind a gated yard. Somewhere, wind chimes stirred like ghosts in the trees. The rain picked up. She paused beneath a bus shelter, more for breath than dryness. Her fingers were stiff. Her legs ached. But the pain in her body was easy to bear compared to the ache in her chest. A car slowed as it approached. The window rolled down, and a woman's voice called, "Ma'am? Do you need a ride?" Margaret turned her head slowly. A kind face. A warm car. She smiled softly. No, thank you. I'm all right. The car lingered for a second, then rolled away. She wasn't all right, but there were things you had to walk through alone. She started moving again, her body heavy, but her steps steady. The weight of the moment, of Nathan's words, of that careful door closing, pressed down on her like the rain soaking through her coat. She felt small, invisible, like a woman wandering through someone else's world. By the time she reached the edge of the main road, the city had swallowed the stars. Her shawl clung to her back like a second skin. Her breath fogged the air in front of her. Still, she walked, mile after mile, silence all around, except for the storm inside her. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she thought of the little boy with gap teeth and scuffed shoes, who once kissed her cheek and promised her the world, and wondered where he'd gone. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, a cup of cold tea untouched beside her. The clock ticked in the quiet, a slow and steady reminder that life goes on, even when something inside you doesn't. Her shoes were still damp by the door. Her shawl hung limp on the coat rack, heavy with the scent of rain and the weight of rejection. She had said nothing to anyone since returning home. No calls to the church ladies, no mention of the visit, no explanation. Some things were too sacred, too humiliating, to be laid bare in conversation. Instead, she reached for the old cedar box tucked beneath the side table. Inside it, a ribbon-tied bundle of pages, letters she had written but never sent. She untied the ribbon with the slow reverence of someone peeling back time. Dear Nathan, today, the snow came early. You always hated the cold, remember? I made stew. The house smells like rosemary and garlic. I thought of you. She flipped to the next. I saw your name in the newspaper again. I cut it out. You looked so confident. I hope you're sleeping enough. Don't forget to eat fruit. Your body needs it. Another. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like you had to escape. I tried my best. Maybe my best wasn't enough. She stopped there, her fingers trembling slightly. That one had never even been folded. She'd written it after his first year at Harvard, on a night when she couldn't sleep, when the ache of absence was too loud in the silence of her small apartment. There were dozens more, written on lined paper, napkins, even the backs of old envelopes when thoughts came too fast to find proper stationery. Some were hopeful, filled with motherly pride, others darker, full of the things she'd never dared to say. She ran her hand over them, then began to read aloud, not to anyone in particular, but to the stillness, to the echoes of her home, and maybe, in some way, to Nathan. I miss you, even now, even after everything. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. I don't want anything from you, Nathan. Just to be remembered. Tears came then. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. They slipped down her cheeks in silence, tracing lines already etched deep by time. She folded the letters one by one, smoothing the creases with her palms. Then she placed them back into the cedar box, tied the ribbon again, and closed the lid. She would never send them, not now, maybe not ever. But they were real. And in writing them, she had spoken the truth, even if no one else ever heard it. A week after she returned, Margaret was carrying her groceries up the stairs when one of the paper bags gave out. Cans clattered against the concrete steps. A box of tea tumbled and split open, its contents scattering like dry leaves in the wind. She sighed and knelt down slowly, her knees aching, her pride aching more. "Let me help you with that, Miss Maggie," came a voice from above. It was Jonah, the teenage boy from the second floor. 16, maybe 17. All wiry limbs and restless energy, always in and out of his mother's apartment. He bent down quickly, gathering the cans and boxes before she could stop him. "I've got it," she said, not unkindly, but with that brittle edge of someone used to doing things alone. "I know," he said, smiling. "But you don't have to." She paused, then nodded, letting him carry the heavier bag as she followed behind with what was left. Inside her apartment, Jonah looked around like he was stepping into another time. His eyes lingered on the doilies, the ticking wall clock, the framed cross-stitch above the stove that read, "Love one another." "Your place smells like church," he said, grinning. Margaret chuckled softly. "That's just eucalyptus oil and old age." He helped her unpack the groceries without being asked. She noticed he put things in their proper places, like someone who'd done it before. When they were done, she offered him a glass of orange juice. He accepted, sitting carefully at her kitchen table like it was something delicate. They talked. Or rather, he asked, and she answered. About the plants on her windowsill, about the music she played on Sundays, about the black and white photograph of a boy on the fridge. "That your son?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Nathan." "Cool name. He look like you." "Used to." Jonah didn't press, and she was grateful for that. Instead, he talked about school, about how his mom worked nights and how the apartment always felt too quiet without her, about wanting to be an architect someday. Margaret listened, offering small nods, small smiles, small silences where other people might have filled the space. When he stood to leave, he turned back at the door. "You know," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "if you ever need help with stuff, like groceries or whatever, you can knock. I don't mind." She smiled, something in her heart tugging gently. "Thank you, Jonah. That's very kind." After he left, she stood for a while by the window, watching the rain begin again in the distance. It was a quiet sort of comfort, knowing someone had seen her fall and didn't turn away. He wasn't her son. He wasn't trying to be. But in his small gesture of kindness, something opened in her that had been closed for far too long. Christmas morning came without fanfare. No music played. No cinnamon scent drifted from the oven. Just the hum of the radiator and the soft rustle of wind against the window glass. Margaret woke early anyway, as she always did. Some habits don't retire with age. She moved slowly through the kitchen, setting out 2 plates instead of 1. Not because she expected a guest, she knew better than that, but because ritual was a kind of comfort, even in its hollowness. The second plate faced hers across the table. Clean, white, untouched. An empty chair pulled out just slightly, a quiet offering to memory. She didn't cook a full meal this year, just made toast and brewed a pot of coffee, but she set the table like it mattered, like someone might walk through the door and notice the effort. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and bowed her head. "Thank you, Lord, for another day, for warm socks, for breath in my lungs, for Jonah upstairs, and," her voice cracked, "and for the years I had with my son, for the little boy who once waited up to open presents with me at dawn." She opened her eyes and looked across at the empty seat. There was no gift for Nathan this year, no card, no letter tucked into a drawer. But there was a memory, fresh as snow on the windowsill, of him at 8 years old, wearing paper reindeer antlers from Sunday school, laughing as he handed her a handmade ornament. He had drawn their little apartment with a crooked roof and written in bold crayon, Home is wherever you are, Mama. She still had that ornament, tucked in a box of old keepsakes she didn't have the heart to open this year. A knock at the door startled her. She rose and opened it, surprised to find Jonah holding a small box wrapped in newspaper and string. "Merry Christmas," he said. "It's nothing big. Just figured you shouldn't be alone." Her eyes misted. "Come in," she said, voice soft. They sat at the table together. He didn't ask who the extra plate was for. She didn't explain. Instead, she poured him coffee. Too bitter, but he drank it anyway, and cut the toast in half to share. Later, when he left, she folded the napkins, rinsed the dishes, and looked once more at the empty chair. It no longer looked like a wound. It looked like love, given freely, even when it's never returned. It was late evening when Margaret sat down in her armchair, a warm blanket across her knees and the soft ticking of the wall clock keeping her company. Outside, the snow had begun to fall, quiet, steady, covering the city in a hush that felt almost sacred. She lit a single candle on the windowsill, as she always did on Nathan's birthday, and watched the flame flicker against the glass. She didn't expect him to call. He hadn't remembered the day in years. But she lit the candle anyway, not in hope, but in remembrance. Beside her, on the side table, lay a worn leather notebook. She had filled it slowly over the past 2 years, page by page, with the truth of her life, not the one others saw, but the one she lived in the silences. Memories of scraped knees and lunchboxes, letters never sent. The sound of her son's laugh echoing off tile floors when he was small enough to be held in her arms. She opened the notebook now and turned to the last page. "I knocked on your door, Nathan. I stood at the edge of your world and waited to be seen. And what you gave me was distance, cold and polished. Not cruelty, but something that somehow hurt worse. I wasn't asking to stay. I just wanted to be let in long enough to say, I remember everything." She paused, her pen hovering. "I remember how you once called me your hero, how you kissed my cheek and told me I was the smartest person you knew. I remember how you danced in the kitchen when you got your scholarship letter, shouting, 'We did it, Mama, we did it.' I never wanted your money. I never asked for your success. I just wanted to sit at your table and see you smile again, not through a screen, not on the pages of magazines, but right there, across from me. The boy I raised, the man you became." She closed the notebook gently, pressing her palm to the cover. The candlelight shimmered in her tired eyes, not with grief, but with clarity. She didn't hate him. That had never been the danger. The danger was forgetting herself in the years spent waiting for a door to open. But now, finally, she understood. Her life hadn't been a mistake. Her love had not been wasted. She had given all she had, and even if he never came back, even if her name never crossed his lips again, she had been true. And that, she had learned, was its own kind of peace. The wind howled outside, and the candle's flame bent low, but did not go out. Margaret whispered aloud into the quiet, "I remember everything, Nathan. Everything. And still, I love you." She reached for the light, blew out the candle, and let the room return to silence. But this time it was not empty. It was full.